Well, of course, doing a project is always very complex, and you can manage to do it. And so, this is another project. Well, this originated a few years ago, and nothing. What can I just say about this? Well, I thought to design some felt, you know those sticky felts that you put for protection? I said, well, it would be nice to manage to design a felt, giving it a new, how can I say, with a new idea. And the typology just was pretty interesting. I mean, if we all always design a chair, there's an incredible competition, right? In the world of chairs, there's so many chairs. And everything has been done. Rather, there are some niches of projects where designers have never worked on, and therefore certainly felts have been the first. I mean, I believe no designer really worked on this. I believe I has been the first designer who has done a sticky felt, because doing this is just an archetype that it's an object which is pretty anonymous, and those that Achille would have just collected, right? Here the project is in the idea of what happens when you use this, right? And you usually buy it, right? A bigger dimension, and then you had to cut it, creating the right dimension for yourself, right? Rather, in this case, well, the felt is already pre-cut, and you can choose the dimension that you're more concerned with. And the interesting is that you have a part to use eventually in another moment. And you can say, oh, okay, well, I mean, that's not this big deal. But at the long run, if you use this, well, of course, it's not that trashing a piece of felt, something happens, but it's always that mental mechanism that I believe a designer should have. And it's always very interesting to communicate this to the final user. If the final user understands that certain projects are thought to be used with attention. And here you see Marco Romanelli wrote a critics on this in occasion of the exhibition that you have done in Triennale a few years ago. Well, Marco is a brother, and Marco says that he belongs to the time that he spends more time in Meazza or in Bricco more than in other places, and there is where you get the true idea and where the true inventor originates. It's like Home Depot, Bricco, and just to give you an idea. And therefore he spends more time there than in any other place, and he's the true inventor. This is what Marco Romanelli said about Lorenzo Damiani. And there is, of course, space for everyone. I'm not saying that everyone has to rush to Home Depot and come up with ideas, but he goes to Home Depot every 2 seconds. Every city he went to, I'm speaking of Achille Castiglioni, he used to go to the food store and to the places where he'd buy chocolate immediately. And the other thing was going into all those utility stores and Home Depot and things like that. And design originates from those things, observing all those small little objects. It's not very many designers who follow this kind of school, right? Lorenzo Fioravanti is another designer who does that and has a strong look. And Achille Castiglioni, of course, had that. You had to look at the Bricco at the Home Depot shelves to learn. Well, with this logic, another project originates, well, which is this. In reality, it's an object of, it's this brush. Well, it's still a prototype, okay, so please... It's, of course, it's fragile, and now it's just a prototype. they're debating on who's. So I imagine that some of you have ever tried to open a can of paint, right? And very frequently you do that with a screwdriver, with anything. I mean, you need a tool. And so the idea was that of using a brush with that tool to open the can. So in this way, and it's an idea which is pretty simple, but it didn't exist. And in the long run, well, I believe that projects have to originate where there is a need. It is pretty interesting to design anything, and maybe you use a certain kind of object, and this creates, I mean, you say, oh my God, why the heck does this not work? And this is the nice aspect of creating a new project and a new design. And then, obviously, it's a very simple idea, but it's a few years that I'm trying to create some objects of this kind. It's very many years that I'm trying to design a hammer. I didn't manage to do that because it's very, very hard to design a hammer that makes sense to be designed. I mean, it's there to do some. I mean, it has to be interesting, right? And it has to be different from those. It's easy to do a hammer, of course, with another function, but that doesn't really make sense. You're waiting for that moment where you get the idea. No, it's not that I'm just staring at a white wall and just hoping for an idea, but it has never happened to me. I mean, it has never happened to me like someone says, you know, I just sleep with the little book. I wake up in the middle of the night and I start drawing. It has never happened to me once. I mean, I'd pay gold and all the gold in the world to get an idea like that. I need to go there, I mean, focus and think, research. Maybe, okay, you're under the shower and maybe you're there, or you're walking around, you get the illumination. But it's because you're thinking about that. I mean, you're prepared, you're studying about the topic. It's not that you just get the inspiration like that. I mean, this is my idea. There's also another factor, speaking about Lorenzo, knowing him more and more deeply. Well, designers nowadays need to have a challenge. And they have to try to design. And this is probably the hardest part to do. Well, of course, you're trying to have companies that pick up these challenges. Well, with this brush, I was thinking very ingenuously that going to a company, they just say, wow, here's the red carpet for you. Because I said, well, no designer has ever designed a brush, or it's just few. And so I called a few of the different companies, and with great surprise, they said, oh, no, they didn't really they were not interested. They didn't want to speak to me on the phone either. And certain companies still think that the work of the designer is that of proposing a different color to the handle and to the nice little brush, that they don't really care. And so I had to face these realities as well. And this is something that happens daily, actually. You do 100 to just gather and pick up 0.5. Wouldn't you want to see this and everyone have this without having Lorenzo Damiani written on it? I mean, would you be happy with that? I would actually be happy if I just find it with the writing designer so-and-so. I mean, no, just to say, I mean, in the long run, nowadays designers want to design to enter in a museum, right? And therefore the name is super important more than the object, right? Where actually you're designing to solve a problem. And yeah, of course, I'd be super happy if they just produce it without writing my name, no problem. I'd call companies that produce brushes. They're just thinking of the boars to eat. And Well, he went to the museum already, so that's what I said, but anyway. There's another object, which is always very simple, and how can I just explain? Well, in the way I design, very, very frequently I say that I'm cannibalizing, I'm stealing some objects that already exist, and I transform these into some components of some other objects. And if the element made of glass is already there, why should I redesign it? It's okay, it's already existing. But in this case, I try to solve a problem, because very frequently the vases of this kind with a glass top, they have this rubber element that becomes yellowish, ugly, and from this I created an idea that it's a top that conceptually it's as if the rubber transforms itself into the true top, and therefore there is one unique material in gel which becomes the top itself. And this idea is pretty, I like this idea. That was very interesting. Go ahead if you want to explain this. Then I brought in a collection of tiles. Well, sometimes I like to design some objects which are not easy to design. What does this mean? Well, it means that you have to go through a model. This is the case of this, because even if you're very good in using computer software and so on, I believe that it's almost impossible or very, very hard to predict a deformation of this kind, because the folds, unless you insert certain parameters, but it becomes very, very hard, because to have some deformation of this kind, you need to understand the type of material, you need to understand the thickness of the section of the tube, because the more it's thin, the more it becomes pointy and edgy when you bend it. And the same thing is true for these tiles collection. This tile collection had a drawing done with a finger, and therefore if you touch these, you feel the material that has been moved, and that's hard to draw. And therefore also in this case, it's determinant to use materials and knowing how to use it. Well, of course, there were also some other thoughts, technical thoughts here.